1948. Late morning, a porch outside Hartford, Connecticut. A man in a felt hat sets a leather case down on the boards. He takes the hat off and raps 3 times on the frame of a screen door. He isn't selling anything yet. In his left hand, there's a small brush he means to give away, free, to whoever opens. That year, by the best count anyone has, roughly 8,300 of these men worked North America. Between them, they made close to 50 million house calls in a country holding fewer than 43 million households. So the average American front door took that knock more than once. But the folklore has his job backwards, so here's the case I want to open. How did one company's salesman get inside almost every home in America, and why did the doors stop opening? Everyone remembers a cheerful fellow with a case of brushes. What he actually carried was a written procedure, tested on millions of doorsteps. It turned a stranger's suspicion into an open door in under 90 seconds, and the brushes were nearly the least important thing in that case. Every move in the procedure was deliberate. Almost every one of them has since been outlawed, automated, or quietly handed over to a screen. I'm going to lay the whole playbook out, move by move, in the order he ran it. Before we're finished, I'll tell you the one move in it that never got retired at all, because it reached you this morning. Somewhere on a street near you, there's a screen door nobody has knocked on in years. That silence didn't arrive by accident, and nobody ever voted on it. America kept the playbook and erased the man who carried it. The man who wrote that playbook was born in Grand Prairie, Nova Scotia, on January 13, 1885. Alfred Carl Fuller was the 11th of 12 children on a farm that couldn't carry them all. He came down to Massachusetts at 18 in 1903 and by his own account got himself fired from 3 jobs in a row. He made a poor streetcar conductor and a worse stable hand. What he could do, it turned out, was stand on a woman's doorstep and talk about the state of her floors. In 1906, he took $375 he'd saved selling another firm's brushes. He set up on his own in his sister's basement, bending wire and setting bristle by hand at night on a cranked machine. In the morning, he walked the neighborhoods with the results. His first week cleared him $42.15. He hadn't invented a brush. He'd invented a loop, build it in the dark, sell it in the light, collect on the way back through. By 1913, the business had a name over a door in Hartford, and the figures began doing something strange. Sales ran about $87,000 in 1916. 7 years later, they were $15 million. None of that jump came out of a store because there were no stores. Every dollar of it walked up somebody's front steps in a man's hand. Which leaves the only question that mattered to Alfred Fuller for the next 50 years. And it's the hinge this whole story turns on. How do you get a suspicious woman to open her door to a man she has never seen? Subscribe if you want the rest of this playbook, because the opening move is the one almost nobody sees coming. He answered it with a vegetable brush. The company called it the Handy, a small, stiff-bristled thing worth pennies, and the dealer gave it away before he asked for anything. Not after a sale, before the conversation had even started. In 1937 alone, Fuller dealers handed out 12.5 million free brushes. For a firm that size, that was a genuinely alarming amount of generosity. Except it wasn't generosity, and every branch manager in the country knew it. A closed door is a decision, made once, and hard to argue with. A gift held out in an open palm turns that decision into a small, awkward transaction. She has half-joined it already, just by reaching. The hand comes through the gap. The gap becomes a doorway. Alfred Fuller put the rest of it in the plainest language you'll find in any sales manual. Be useful first and sell second, he taught, and he described his own early rounds without a trace of poetry. He washed babies with a back brush, swept stairs, cleaned radiators and milk bottles, dusted floors. Anything at all that would prove the worth of what he had to sell. So the dealer arrived carrying a favor and a chore. He'd sweep the stoop while he talked, he'd scrub a scorched pan and hand it back warm. And the woman of the house had been told her entire life not to let strangers in. She'd already let one do her dishes. The gift bought him the doorway. It never bought him the kitchen, and the kitchen was where the money sat. The next move is the one American psychologists would spend the 1960s trying to name. Watch the order of operations, because in 80 years it barely changed. The dealer never opened with a price. He opened with the smallest available yes. May I set this case down? May I show you one thing? Each request was easy to grant and slightly harder to take back. Once he was inside, the demonstration ran on a fixed 5-part shape the men were drilled on. Name the brush. Show what it does, in the room, on the actual floor. Say what it's made of. Then the price. Then last, why the price is a bargain. Price fourth and never first, because a price named early is an argument, while a price named late is a formality. It worked at a rate that reads like a misprint. In homes where the dealer got a full demonstration, roughly 2 out of 3 ended in an order, usually somewhere between $3 and $7, and the whole of it was experienced by nobody as a trick. Then, in 1966, 2 psychologists at Stanford put the thing under glass. Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser published a paper called Compliance Without Pressure in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. They telephoned housewives and asked a few harmless questions about the household products they used. Days later, they came back with an outrageous request. Could 5 or 6 men come through the house for 2 hours and inventory every cupboard? Among the women who had answered the small questions first, 52.8% said yes. Among the women asked cold, 22.2%. The paper handed the effect the name it still carries in every marketing textbook printed since: the foot in the door. So a laboratory in California spent 1966 discovering what a farm boy from Nova Scotia already knew. He'd been doing it on porches since before the First World War. And yet a playbook is worth nothing without men willing to walk it. In 1909, Alfred Fuller spent a small sum on a magazine advertisement, and it wasn't aimed at housewives at all. It was aimed at men who wanted work. Inside a month, he had 260 dealers and something you could fairly call a national business. It ran entirely on other people's shoe leather. Here's the part the warm version leaves out. Those men were not employees. They bought their brushes from the company at a set price and kept the difference. That margin began near 50% of retail and later settled closer to a third. No salary, no wage if it rained, no pension, no territory unless they kept producing in it, and no floor under a bad month. The arrangement had a certain beauty from Hartford's side of the ledger. Every risk in the model sat out on the porch while every certainty sat in the factory. A dealer's failure cost the company almost nothing because the company had already been paid. A dealer's success cost it nothing either. Arguably, the cleanest business ever run on a handshake. So who was the real customer here? Not the woman at the door, the man on the step who was buying every week, in advance, with his own money. Hold on to that inversion, because it explains a set of numbers we'll reach shortly that fit the legend very badly. First, though, the dealer had to learn something nobody could teach him in a room. A fuller territory was measured in families rather than in miles. A dealer held somewhere between 2,000 and 6,000 of them. The working figure most branch managers used was around 2,500 homes. He walked them end to end, then started the round again every 3 months. That meant close to 6 miles a day on foot and about 60 doorbells rung to do it. 3 months is a deliberate interval, in truth, the most deliberate number in the whole system. It's long enough that a brush has worn out and short enough that a face is still remembered. It turns a salesman into something nearer a mailman, expected, fixed in the week, part of the furniture of a street. That's where the root stopped being geography. A good dealer knew which house had a new baby and which had a sick mother upstairs. He knew the dog's name and which porch board gave way underfoot. He took the order on Tuesday and delivered it the following week. Then he collected the cash in person on payday because a man who comes back on payday has read the whole street. The country noticed him. The Saturday Evening Post put the phrase "Fuller Brush Man" into print in 1921, and after that, nobody ever had to explain it again. By 1923, a district manager named Albert Tietzel had the dealers organized into clubs. Their slogan was "Fine and Dandy," which for a company selling scrub brushes was a fair amount of theater. From the outside, all of that looks like a career. A rote, a name, a reputation, a customer list, a man might one day hand to his son, and that is precisely where the legend and the ledger stop agreeing with each other. Here's the objection a sharp viewer is already forming, and it's the strongest one on the table. This was a good job. A man could feed a family off a fuller route, and the country simply grew richer and walked away from it. It's a decent argument, and the company's own books take it apart. In January 1938, Fortune magazine went through those books. It found 5,110 dealers actively selling. It also found the company recruiting about 12,000 new men every single year. Only one applicant in 3 or 4 lasted 12 months. Sit with that ratio a moment. To hold 5,000 men on the road, Hartford had to hire 12,000. In one selling period that year, the rolls carried 4,350 dealers. 2,783 of them had been at it under 6 months. Across the entire national force, only 192 men had lasted 5 years. Training, meanwhile, ran to an hour on 2 successive afternoons. So the picture turns over. The fuller brush man wasn't a profession with a turnover problem. He was a turnstile in a felt hat, and the steady product coming out of Hartford was never really brushes. It was recruits. 12,000 hopeful men a year, each buying his own sample case, each working a fresh street until the arithmetic found him out. The famous names we still trot out, the future preachers and actors who sold Fuller for a season, aren't proof the job was wonderful. They're evidence of how many people passed through it on their way to something else. The man who did last, the one with the route and the payday round, had something else coming. He was about to meet the first door in America that closed by law. Green River, Wyoming, in 1931, was a railroad town of a few thousand people with a shift work problem. Men slept days. Salesmen knocked days. So the council passed an ordinance declaring uninvited door-to-door soliciting a nuisance. Knocking on a stranger's door without an invitation became an offense. Fuller Brush took it to court because Fuller Brush had the most to lose by far. The company fought it up the ladder and lost, and on March 1, 1937, the Supreme Court declined the appeal, leaving the ban standing. The name stuck to the law itself. Towns all over the country copied it. To this day, an American municipal code will say Green River Ordinance, and every lawyer in the room knows what's meant. A lesser firm would have raged about it. Hartford simply rewrote the playbook. If a dealer couldn't knock uninvited, he'd arrange to be invited. Between 5 and 7 in the evening, he walked those same streets with a catalog called the Health and Beauty Manual. He slipped it under doors with a folded note, promising to come back with a free gift. The gift again. Always the gift going through the door ahead of the man. That's the piece I'd point at to explain why the company came through the 1930s intact. The brush trade as a whole shrank, its wholesale value falling from about $50 million in 1923 to $42 million by 1935. What saved Hartford wasn't the bristle, and it wasn't the patter. It was a willingness to treat a closed door as a design problem. But no ordinance ever did the company serious harm. What arrived next was the opposite of a ban, and it turned out to be far more dangerous. On May 25, 1933, Disney released Three Little Pigs. The big bad wolf gets himself to the brick house by pretending to be a Fuller Brush salesman. Consider what that gag requires. Every child in every theater in America had to already know that knock, that hat, that case, or the joke lands on nothing at all. The company had become shorthand, and the movies kept at it. In June 1948, Columbia released The Fuller Brush Man, directed by S. Sylvan Simon and starring Red Skelton as a hopeless dealer who blunders into a murder. Hartford gave its blessing on one condition, and it's a revealing one. The studio had to make clear that the character was an independent dealer and not an employee of the company. 2 years later came the sequel, The Fuller Brush Girl, carried by Lucille Ball, with Red Skelton turning up in a cameo. A brush company had a movie franchise. The business crested around the same years. Sales ran $41 million in 1946 and $109 million by 1960. Now, I have to be straight with you about a number. You'll hear that Fuller men reached 90% of American homes. You'll see a peak force quoted as 35,000 or 25,000, depending who's telling it. The company never published an audited figure, and the counts that survive don't agree with one another. What can be checked is this. In 1948, those dealers made close to 50 million house calls in a nation of fewer than 43 million households. That's its own kind of answer. Every one of those calls rested on one assumption nobody in 1948 thought worth writing down. Somebody had to be home. The whole playbook, every move in it, assumed an adult standing behind a door on a Tuesday afternoon. That assumption held for roughly 40 years, then quietly stopped holding. In 1950, about 34% of American women were in the paid labor force. By 1960, it was almost 38. By 1970, 43. By 1980, more than half of American women worked. A dealer walking his 2,500 homes in 1975 was walking past kitchens that were simply empty at the hour he had always come. He couldn't shift to evenings either, or not easily. Evenings were when families were finally together and least inclined to open a door to a stranger holding a case. Somebody else read the same census. Avon sent part-time women out to sell to their own neighbors, on their own hours, at times that suited a working life. Between 1953 and 1967, Avon's sales grew by more than 900%. Fuller Brush managed 47% across those same 14 years. Hartford's answer was to hire women, which it did in earnest only in 1966, taking on some 17,500 of them that year. Late, and by most counts, far too late. In 1968, the family sold the company to Consolidated Foods, later Sara Lee. By the early 1970s, the brushes were being made in Great Bend, Kansas. That factory ran to 600,000 square feet, a long way from a basement in Somerville. If you want the version that came to the door on a wagon loaded with groceries, the Jewel T film on this channel covers it. So the customer had left the house, and yet the empty kitchens weren't the worst of it. What finished the job was happening at the doors that still had somebody behind them. By 1987, Fuller Brush had 13,000 representatives, 8 in 10 of them women, and 9 in 10 working part-time. That April, the company mailed its first full-color catalog to more than 1 million households. That September, it opened a retail store in Mesquite, Texas, which for a firm built on never having a store, was close to a confession. A reporter for the Christian Science Monitor asked why, and the answers came back flat and unglamorous. Convenience stores had turned a brush into a 5-minute errand. Women were at work, and homeowners had stopped opening the door to a stranger. That last one is what finished him. No law, no vote, no announcement anywhere. A country of chain locks and peepholes, and eventually a small camera above the bell. Now here's the payoff I promised you at the start, and it isn't a eulogy. The playbook never died. It got lifted whole, move for move, off the porch and onto the glass in your hand. The free handy brush is the free sample and the free trial. The small first yes is your email address. The living room demonstration is a video of somebody opening a box. The exclusive territory of 2,500 families is an advertising radius drawn around a postcode. The one move nobody ever retired is the gift at the threshold. Every offer that reaches you before it asks you for a thing is running Alfred Fuller's 1906 opening. It still works for exactly the reason it worked then. If you still notice what's gone missing from an American street, this channel puts one of these out every week, and you already belong here. Fuller Brush itself filed for Chapter 11 on February 21, 2012. By 2016, it was winding down its independent distributor system altogether, which was the last formal trace of the man on the step. Not quite the last, though. In 2015, a Boston newspaper went looking and found Al Cohen. He'd been running a Fuller route since 1967 and still carried about 1,000 regular customers. He was one of 3 Fuller brushmen left in Massachusetts. What kept him at it, he said, was that a few people on his list were still expecting him. 40-odd years on one route. He'd have known the babies as grandmothers. That's the whole of it in the end. The brushes were fine, and plenty of them are still sold. What went was the arrangement, a stranger with a gift, a fixed round, and a door that opened. So picture a small house on a hot afternoon, right now, wherever you happen to be. An old man sits on the porch in a folding chair, the inside door propped open behind him. The screen door is latched, because that's how his mother always kept it. Nobody knocks on it anymore. He's stopped listening for it the way a man stops hearing a clock. His granddaughter is out on the walk with a jar of something she made. She holds it in front of her the way you hold a thing you're proud of. She comes up the steps and doesn't call ahead, because she's 5 and doesn't yet know that grown people call ahead. She raps 3 times on the wooden frame in the exact spot a man in a felt hat once did. Then she waits with the gift held up in both hands. He gets up out of the chair. He unlatches the screen door and takes what she's offering before she asks him for anything at all, which is how it always worked and how it works still. A century of American selling came down to 3 knuckles on a screen door and somebody inside deciding to get up.